The five-stage wealth transfer. How 1% took everything in 2008. We're now in stage 4, final stage. There's a mechanism in capitalism that most people never see. A transfer system so elegant, so perfectly engineered, that by the time you realize it's happening, your wealth is already gone. It operated in 1929 when working families lost their homes while J.P. Morgan bought entire city blocks for pennies. It ran flawlessly in 2008 when middle-class retirement accounts evaporated while private equity firms acquired distressed assets at 90% discounts. And right now, in 2025, it's executing again. We're in stage 4 of a 5-stage wealth transfer. The same stage that in 2008 preceded the largest upward redistribution of wealth in modern history. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented pattern recognition. And once you understand the mechanism, you'll see it operating everywhere around you. Let me take you back to September 2008. Lehman Brothers has just collapsed. Bear Stearns is gone. Merrill Lynch sold itself to Bank of America in a weekend. AIG is hours from insolvency. The entire global financial system is seizing up. Credit markets are frozen. Banks won't lend to each other overnight. The commercial paper market, the bloodstream of corporate America, has stopped functioning. And in Washington, Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, goes to Congress with a 3-page proposal. He wants $700 billion, no oversight, no conditions. Just give him the money to buy toxic assets from banks. The proposal is rejected. Markets crater. The Dow falls 778 points in a single day, the largest point drop in history. Panic spreads globally. And then Congress capitulates. They pass TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. $700 billion to save the financial system. But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. That 3-page proposal, that emergency legislation passed in crisis, it wasn't written in September 2008. The framework had been sitting in Treasury drawers for months. Paulson later admitted in interviews that they'd been preparing for a major intervention since March when Bear Stearns failed. They were waiting for the right crisis, the right moment of panic when Congress would approve anything. This is stage 1 of the wealth transfer, crisis creation. Not that they caused the crisis, the housing bubble did that, but they let it reach maximum severity before acting. Why? Because the deeper the crisis, the less oversight there is on the solution. The more panic there is, the more power you can seize, and the more assets you can acquire at distressed prices. Think about what happened in those months between March and September 2008. The Fed and Treasury knew the system was collapsing. They had all the data. They could see the mortgage defaults accelerating, the derivatives exposure expanding, the counterparty risks multiplying. They could have intervened early, could have provided targeted support, could have unwound positions gradually. They didn't. They let Lehman fail. Why? Because Lehman's failure created the panic necessary to push through unlimited intervention. If they'd saved Lehman, Congress might have asked questions, might have imposed conditions, might have demanded reforms. But after Lehman failed, after the market crashed, after the world economy teetered on collapse, Congress gave them everything they asked for. No questions, no strings. Just take the money and fix it. And who benefited? Not the homeowners facing foreclosure. TARP was supposed to help them, but less than $50 billion of the $700 billion went to mortgage relief. Not the small businesses that couldn't get credit, not the workers losing their jobs. The money went to banks, the same banks whose reckless lending created the crisis. Goldman Sachs got $10 billion, Morgan Stanley got $10 billion, J.P. Morgan got $25 billion, Bank of America got $45 billion, Citigroup got $45 billion. These weren't loans to struggling institutions. These were capital injections to healthy firms that were getting healthier by buying distressed competitors. J.P. Morgan bought Bear Stearns for $2 per share, a company that traded at $170 a year earlier. They bought Washington Mutual's banking operations for $1.9 billion, a steal for the largest savings and loan in America. Bank of America bought Countrywide Financial, the largest mortgage lender, and Merrill Lynch, one of the biggest investment banks. Wells Fargo bought Wachovia. These weren't rescues. These were acquisitions. the biggest banks using crisis conditions to eliminate competition and consolidate market share. And they did it with government money. TARP funds were supposed to restart lending. Instead, banks used them to shore up balance sheets, pay bonuses, and buy competitors. By 2009, the financial sector was more concentrated than ever. The top 4 banks controlled over 50% of all deposits, up from 30% in 2000. The wealth transfer had begun, but that was just the mechanism. The real transfer happened through what came next. Stage 2, quantitative easing, the largest monetary expansion in human history. Let me explain how this works because it's crucial to understanding who won and who lost. In November 2008, the Federal Reserve announces it will buy $600 billion in mortgage-backed securities. These are the toxic assets that crashed the system, the securities backed by subprime mortgages that were defaulting in massive numbers. The Fed is creating new money and using it to buy assets that nobody else wants at prices above their market value. Why would they do this? The official reason is to support the housing market, to keep mortgage rates low, to prevent a complete collapse. The real reason is to save the banks holding these assets. If those securities are worth 30 cents on the dollar, marking them to market would wipe out bank capital. Banks would fail. But if the Fed buys them at 70 cents or 80 cents on the dollar, banks can survive. The losses are transferred to the Fed's balance sheet, which means they're transferred to taxpayers. But it gets better, because the Fed doesn't stop at $600 billion. Between 2008 and 2014, they'll do 3 rounds of quantitative easing, QE1, QE2, QE3. They'll purchase over $4 trillion in assets. Treasury bonds, mortgage securities, agency debt. They're printing money and buying assets. But here's the critical part most people miss. When the Fed creates this money, where does it go first? It doesn't go to workers. It doesn't go to small businesses. It doesn't even go to the real economy. It goes to banks. The Fed buys securities from banks, giving them cash. Those banks then have a choice. They could lend it to businesses and consumers, or they could invest it in assets, stocks, bonds, real estate. And what do? They invest. Because lending is risky in a recession. Businesses might default. Consumers might not repay. But buying assets, that's safe, especially when you know the Fed will keep printing money to buy more assets, pushing prices higher. This is the mechanism of the wealth transfer. The Fed creates trillions in new money. That money flows to asset owners. Asset prices rise, but wages don't. Consumer goods prices don't, not immediately. The inflation shows up first in financial assets. Stocks soar, bonds rally, real estate recovers. By 2013, the S&P 500 has doubled from its 2009 lows. By 2017, it's tripled. By 2024, it's up over 600%. If you owned assets in 2009, you got fabulously wealthy. If you didn't, you got left behind, because your wages didn't triple. Your savings account didn't triple. Only assets did. And who owns assets? The wealthy. The top 10% of Americans own 89% of all stocks. The top 1% own 54%. So when the stock market triples, when bond portfolios soar, when real estate recovers, the vast majority of those gains flow to people who are already rich. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% of Americans own less than 1% of stocks. For them, the recovery is invisible. Their homes are foreclosed. Their retirement accounts were cashed out in the crisis. Their wages are stagnant. They're working the same hours for the same pay while watching asset prices climb beyond reach. This brings us to stage 3 of the wealth transfer. Asset price inflation combined with wage suppression, and this is where the real violence happens, because it's not just that asset prices rise, it's that they rise while ordinary people's purchasing power collapses. Let me show you the mathematics. In 2008, the median home price in America was $198,000. By 2025, it's $420,000. That's a 112% increase, but the median household income in 2008 was $52,000. In 2025, it's $75,000. That's just a 44% increase. Do you see the problem? Housing prices grew 2.5 times faster than incomes. In 2008, the median home cost 3.8 times median income. In 2025, it costs 5.6 times median income. Home ownership has become mathematically impossible for an entire generation. And it's not just housing. College tuition has increased 180% since 2008. Healthcare costs are up 120%. Childcare costs have doubled. But wages? They've barely kept pace with official inflation, which itself is manipulated to understate real cost increases. The result is a generation that can't afford homes, can't afford education, can't afford healthcare, can't afford children. They're locked out of asset ownership, which means they're locked out of wealth creation. Because in a financialized economy, wealth doesn't come from labor. It comes from owning things that appreciate. If you owned a home in 2009, you doubled your money. If you owned stocks, you made 600%. If you owned Bitcoin early, you made 10,000%. But if all you owned was your labor, if your only asset was your time and skills, you made maybe 40% over 16 years. Barely enough to keep up with real inflation, not nearly enough to build wealth. This is the mechanism. Asset prices rise faster than wages. The gap between owners and workers expands. And that gap doesn't close, it compounds. Because if you own assets, your returns allow you to buy more assets. But if you don't own assets, you can never save enough from wages to enter the market. You're trapped, working to survive, never building wealth. And here's the cruelest part. This isn't an accident, this is policy. Explicit, intentional policy. The Fed's mandate is maximum employment and stable prices, but since 2008, they've redefined those terms. Maximum employment now means keeping unemployment just low enough that workers can't demand wage increases. If unemployment drops too low, workers gain negotiating power. They can ask for raises, switch jobs for better pay, demand benefits. And what happens then? Wages rise. But the Fed calls that inflation. Not asset inflation, they love asset inflation. Wage inflation. And what do? They raise interest rates to cool the economy, which means causing unemployment, which means suppressing wages. Look at 2022 and 2023. Inflation hits 9%, the highest in 40 years. But it's not wage inflation. Workers aren't getting 9% raises. It's supply chain inflation, energy inflation, corporate profit inflation. Yet what does the Fed do? They raise rates aggressively, the fastest rate hiking cycle since the 1980s. And what's their stated goal? To cool the labor market. Translation: cause unemployment, make workers desperate, ensure they can't demand raises. Fed Chair Jerome Powell literally said in a press conference that there are too many jobs. Too many jobs. Think about that. The central bank's position is that too many people having employment is a problem that needs fixing. Why? Because employed workers have leverage. And leverage for workers means lower profits for corporations, which means lower stock prices, which means the wealthy lose wealth. Can't have that. Better to keep workers precarious, keep them competing for jobs, keep them unable to demand more. This is stage 3. And it's not just the Fed. Corporations are complicit. Look at stock buybacks. Between 2009 and 2024, S&P 500 companies spent over $7 trillion on share buybacks. That's money that could have gone to worker wages, to research and development, to capital investment. Instead, it went to inflating share prices. Why? Because executive compensation is tied to stock performance. CEOs get paid in options. When share prices rise, they get rich. So they use corporate cash to buy back shares, reducing supply, pushing prices higher. It's legal, it's common, and it's wealth transfer from labor to capital. Because those buybacks come from profits generated by workers. But the workers don't see that money. Shareholders do. Let me give you a specific example. Apple. From 2012 to 2024, Apple spent over $650 billion on buybacks and dividends. That's more than the GDP of Poland. Now, Apple has 160,000 employees. If they distributed that $650 billion as wages instead of buybacks, every employee could have received an additional $4 million over those 12 years. Obviously, that math is too simple. There are shareholders and capital requirements, but the point stands. Hundreds of billions that could have created middle-class wealth went to making rich shareholders richer. And it's the same across every major corporation. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Exxon, they're all doing it. Taking profits, buying shares, inflating prices, enriching people who were already wealthy, while their workers qualify for food stamps. Walmart and Amazon, two of the largest employers in America, have thousands of employees on public assistance. Medicaid, food stamps, housing assistance. These companies are profitable. Walmart makes $15 billion annually. Amazon makes $30 billion, but they pay wages so low that taxpayers subsidize their workforce. It's a double transfer. First, public money via low taxes and subsidies. Second, suppressed wages that force workers onto public assistance. The corporation extracts maximum profit, the owners get rich, and taxpayers cover the difference. This is stage 3. Asset inflation, wage suppression, and structural policies that ensure wealth flows upward. Now we come to stage 4, where we are right now in 2025. And this is the critical stage, the consolidation. This is where the wealth gap becomes permanent, where social mobility dies, where the transfer is locked in. Let me show you what's happening right now. Private equity. These are firms that buy companies using massive leverage, extract maximum cash, then either flip them or let them die. And they're buying everything. Housing. By 2025, private equity and institutional investors own over 30% of single-family rental homes in major markets. In some cities, it's over 50%. They're not buying these homes to live in them, they're buying them to rent. And not at affordable rates, they're using algorithms to maximize rent extraction, pushing prices higher, making home ownership impossible for the next generation. Healthcare. Private equity owns over 10% of all emergency rooms, 30% of air ambulance services, thousands of nursing homes, dental practices, dermatology clinics. They buy these practices, fire doctors, replace them with cheaper providers, reduce services, increase billing. Patient care deteriorates, profits soar. Media. Local newspapers, radio stations, television networks. Private equity buys them, slashes staff, reduces local coverage, increases prices. Information deserts form. Communities lose their voice. Infrastructure, water systems, toll roads, parking meters, prisons. Public assets sold to private equity, who then extract maximum fees from captive users. You can't not drive on the toll road. You can't not pay for water. They've got you. This is stage 4. The conversion of assets from distributed ownership to concentrated ownership, from individual homeowners to corporate landlords, from independent businesses to private equity portfolios, from public goods to private profit centers. And here's why this matters. When assets are widely distributed, wealth is widely distributed. When many people own homes, many people build equity. When small businesses are independent, profits stay local. When infrastructure is public, fees are minimized. But when assets are concentrated, wealth is concentrated. When BlackRock owns your home, your rent becomes their profit. When KKR owns your hospital, your healthcare costs become their dividend. When Blackstone owns your apartment complex, your rent increase becomes their performance fee. You're not building wealth. They are. Using your need for shelter, healthcare, transportation as extraction points, and you can't opt out. You need these things to survive. That's what makes this stage so devastating. It's not just that the wealthy own assets. It's that they own the essential assets, the things you must pay for: housing, healthcare, transportation, education. They've taken the necessities of life and turned them into profit centers. You work, you earn wages, but those wages don't build your wealth. They flow to asset owners as rent, as interest, as fees. You're on a treadmill, running faster but never getting ahead, because the system is designed to extract your productivity and channel it upward. Now let me show you the mathematics of how extreme this has become, because numbers make it undeniable. In 1989, the top 1% of Americans held 23% of all wealth. By 2008, it was 33%. By 2025, it's 43%. Nearly half of all wealth in the richest country in human history is held by 1 out of every 100 people. But even that understates the concentration. The top 0.1%, that's 1 in 1,000 people, they hold 20% of all wealth. 330,000 people own one-fifth of America's $140 trillion in assets. That's $420,000 per person for them. Meanwhile, the bottom 50%, that's 165 million people, they hold less than 2% of all wealth. That's $1,300 per person. The top 400 Americans have more wealth than the bottom 60% combined. 198 million people have less wealth than 400 individuals. And this isn't because they work harder. It's not because they're smarter or more innovative. It's because they own assets in a system designed to inflate asset prices while suppressing wage growth. Let me make this concrete. Jeff Bezos has a net worth of about $200 billion. He didn't earn that. Amazon's profits don't justify it. His wealth comes from stock appreciation, Amazon's market cap rising from $100 billion to $2 trillion. That appreciation is driven by cheap money, by the Fed keeping rates near zero for years, by QE pumping trillions into financial markets. Bezos didn't create $200 billion in value. The monetary system transferred $200 billion in purchasing power to his stock holdings. And the same is true for Elon Musk, for Larry Page, for Mark Zuckerberg. Their wealth is stock appreciation driven by monetary policy. Meanwhile, an Amazon warehouse worker makes $35,000 a year. They're creating the value, packing the boxes, shipping the products. But they're not seeing the wealth. That flows to shareholders. This is the mechanism running at full speed. Asset appreciation for owners, wage stagnation for workers, wealth transfer complete. But here's what makes 2025 different from 2008. In 2008, the transfer happened during crisis. The wealthy bought distressed assets, while everyone else was forced to sell. It was obvious, painful, visible. This time, it's happening during seeming prosperity. The stock market is at all-time highs, unemployment is low, GDP is growing, everything looks fine. But beneath the surface, the transfer is accelerating. Housing is unaffordable, healthcare is unaffordable, education is unaffordable. Retirement is impossible. The majority of Americans live paycheck to paycheck while asset owners accumulate unprecedented wealth. And the gap keeps widening. Because this is stage 4, the quiet consolidation. The moment when the transfer becomes structural, permanent, irreversible through normal means. Let me show you why this is irreversible. Because it's not just that the wealthy own assets, it's that they own the mechanisms of wealth creation. Banks. The top 6 banks control $13 trillion in assets. They decide who gets loans, who gets credit, who can buy a home or start a business. And they're not lending to ordinary people. They're lending to the wealthy to buy more assets. Real estate. Institutional investors own vast portfolios. They can outbid individuals because they have cheaper capital, economies of scale, and infinite time horizons. You're bidding with your savings. They're bidding with unlimited credit. You lose. Technology. The top 5 tech companies have market caps exceeding $10 trillion. They control the platforms, the data, the infrastructure of modern commerce. Every transaction on Amazon, every ad on Google, every sale on Facebook's marketplace generates fees that flow upward. Energy. Despite talk of renewables, fossil fuel companies and utilities control the grid. You must pay them. There's no alternative. They set prices. You accept them. Healthcare. Insurance companies and pharmaceutical firms control access to medicine. They set prices. You pay or you die. Media. A handful of conglomerates control what you see, hear, and read. They shape perception, manufacture consent, determine which issues matter. This is why stage 4 is the critical stage. Because it's not just wealth concentration, it's power concentration. The wealthy don't just have money. They have control over the systems that generate money. They own the game board. And once they own the board, they can change the rules to ensure they keep winning. Look at lobbying. Corporations and wealthy individuals spend $4 billion annually lobbying Congress. That's more than the entire federal budget for the EPA. They're not lobbying for better wages or affordable housing. They're lobbying for tax cuts, deregulation, subsidies, for policies that protect and expand their wealth. And it works. The 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act reduced corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%, adding $1.9 trillion to the deficit. That money didn't go to workers. It went to buybacks and dividends. The CARES Act in 2020, passed during COVID, gave trillions in aid. But the majority went to corporations, not individuals. The PPP loan program was riddled with fraud. Companies that didn't need help got millions. Small businesses got nothing. Legislation is written by lobbyists, passed by politicians funded by the wealthy, and enforced by regulators who came from and will return to the industries they regulate. The revolving door between Wall Street and Washington is spinning so fast, it's a blur. Treasury secretaries from Goldman Sachs, SEC chairs going to work for hedge funds, FDA officials joining pharmaceutical boards. The government isn't regulating the wealthy. It's working for them. This is structural capture. And it's why voting doesn't fix this. Because both parties are funded by the same donors. Both parties pass policies that favor capital over labor. Both parties bail out banks while telling workers to find better jobs. The wealth transfer isn't partisan. It's systemic. And stage 4 is where it becomes locked in, where wealth becomes power, becomes more wealth, becomes more power. A self-reinforcing cycle that cannot be broken through normal democratic means. Because the wealthy control the levers of democracy itself. Now let me show you what stage 5 looks like, because we're about to enter it. And when we do, the transfer will be complete. Stage 5 is the crisis that finalizes everything. The moment when the remaining wealth held by the middle class gets extracted. And it's coming. The mathematics guarantee it. Here's why. The wealth transfer of the last 16 years was enabled by low interest rates and unlimited QE. But that era is ending. The Fed can't keep rates at zero forever. Inflation forced their hand in 2022 and 2023. Rates went from 0% to 5.5%. And when rates rise, debt becomes expensive. Who has the most debt? Not the wealthy. They have assets. The middle and lower classes have debt. Mortgages, student loans, credit cards, auto loans. $18 trillion in household debt. When rates rise, those payments rise. When payments rise, disposable income falls. When disposable income falls, consumption drops. When consumption drops, businesses suffer. When businesses suffer, workers get laid off. When workers get laid off, they default on debts. When they default, lenders take losses. When lenders take losses, credit tightens. When credit tightens, asset prices fall. And when asset prices fall, we get forced selling, cascading liquidations, margin calls, the same mechanics that destroyed wealth in 1929 and 2008. And who survives that? The wealthy, because they have cash, they have credit lines. They have assets they can borrow against at low rates. When asset prices crash, they buy. They bought in 2009. They'll buy in 2026 or 2027 or whenever the next crisis hits. But the middle class, they're wiped out. Their 401k collapses, their home equity vanishes, their job disappears. And this time there's no recovery for them because they're already leveraged to the maximum, already living paycheck to paycheck, already unable to afford housing, healthcare, education. The next crisis doesn't hurt them. It destroys them. And the destruction isn't accidental. It's the final stage of the wealth transfer. Let me be very specific about what stage 5 will look like, because the signs are already visible. Corporate bankruptcies are rising. In 2024, over 800 companies filed for bankruptcy, the highest since 2010. These aren't small businesses. These are corporations with billions in debt that they can't service at higher rates. When they fail, their assets get liquidated. Who buys them? Private equity. The same firms that already own 30% of the economy. Commercial real estate is collapsing. Office buildings are empty. Remote work killed demand. But these buildings are financed with short-term debt that's now resetting at 6% instead of 2%. Owners can't pay. They default. Banks foreclose. Who buys the distressed properties? Blackstone, Brookfield, Apollo. They're already positioning. Regional banks are fragile. Silicon Valley Bank failed in 2023. First Republic failed. Signature Bank failed. These weren't isolated incidents. They're warnings. Hundreds of regional banks have unrealized losses on bond portfolios that, if recognized, would wipe out capital. When the next stress hits, more will fail. And who will buy their assets? JP Morgan, Bank of America, the mega banks that are too big to fail. Household savings are depleted. The excess savings built up during COVID are gone. Credit card debt is at record highs. Delinquencies are rising. Subprime auto loans are defaulting. This isn't speculation. This is happening now. The stress is building. The system is fragile. And when something breaks, when the recession everyone keeps predicting finally arrives, the liquidation will be violent. Homes will be foreclosed. Retirement accounts will collapse. Businesses will close. And assets will transfer from desperate sellers to patient buyers, from the many to the few. This is stage 5, the crisis that completes the transfer. And here's what makes it final. After this, there's nothing left to take. The middle class will be hollowed out. Asset ownership will be concentrated among a tiny elite. The majority will be renters, debtors, workers with no equity, no wealth, no leverage. A neo-feudal structure where land and capital are held by a permanent aristocracy and everyone else works for access to necessities. You think I'm exaggerating? Look at trends. Home ownership rates for people under 35 have collapsed. They're 38% down from 45% in 2005. An entire generation locked out. Retirement account balances are pathetic. The median 401k for people aged 55-64 is $71,000. That's not enough to retire on. They'll work until they die. Labor force participation is declining, not because people don't want to work, because they've given up. Wages don't cover costs. Why struggle when there's no hope? This is the outcome of the wealth transfer. Our society where opportunity is dead, where the ladder has been pulled up, where your birth determines your destiny, because mobility requires assets and assets are unreachable. And the wealthy are fine with this. They've built fortified enclaves, private schools, private security, private healthcare. They don't need a functional middle class. Automation and AI will handle production. They just need a desperate labor pool willing to work for subsistence wages. You think I'm being hyperbolic? Listen to what they say. Ray Dalio, billionaire founder of Bridgewater, warns of wealth gaps causing social instability. Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, talks about the need for inclusive capitalism while his bank hoards assets. Even Warren Buffett admits the system is rigged. He pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. These people know what's happening. They're not stupid. They're not evil. They're just winning a game where the rules favor capital over labor. And they're not going to change those rules voluntarily. Why would they? The system works perfectly for them. This is where we are. Stage 4, transitioning to stage 5. The wealth has been transferred. The structures are in place. The crisis will finalize it. And on the other side, we'll have a society that resembles the Gilded Age more than the post-war prosperity. Massive wealth at the top, desperation at the bottom, and a missing middle. Now, you need to understand something crucial. This outcome isn't inevitable. Not in some cosmic sense. It's inevitable within the current system, given current policies, given current power structures. But systems can change. History shows us that. The Gilded Age ended with the Progressive Era. Reforms, regulations, trust-busting. The Great Depression ended with the New Deal. Social safety nets, labor rights, financial regulation. The 1970s stagflation ended with, well, actually that's when this current transfer began. Reagan, Thatcher, deregulation, financialization. So we know change is possible. But it requires crisis. It requires pressure. It requires people understanding what's happening and demanding something different. And that's why I'm telling you this. Not to depress you, not to make you hopeless, but to make you see the mechanism. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every policy decision, every market move, every economic headline, you'll recognize which stage it belongs to. You'll see the transfer in real time. And maybe if enough people see it, if enough people understand that this isn't natural, isn't inevitable, isn't justified, maybe there's a chance to change direction before stage 5 completes. But that window is closing. We're in stage 4 now. The consolidation is nearly complete. The structures are hardening. The power is concentrating. Stage 5, the final crisis, the complete transfer, it's coming. Maybe next year, maybe in 3 years. But it's coming. The mathematics demand it. And when it arrives, it will be faster and more devastating than 2008, because there's more leverage now, more debt, more concentration, more fragility. And the people who will benefit are already positioned. They have cash, they have credit, they have patience. They're waiting for you to panic, to sell, to liquidate, and they'll be there to buy. At 50 cents on the dollar, at 20 cents, at whatever you'll accept when you're desperate. This is the 5-stage wealth transfer: crisis creation, monetary expansion, asset inflation, consolidation, final liquidation. We've seen 4 stages complete. Stage 5 is next, and unlike 2008, this time the middle class has nothing left to cushion the fall. The wealth is gone, the assets are concentrated. The transfer will be total. You're watching the greatest redistribution of wealth in modern history. Not theft exactly, nothing illegal, just a system working exactly as designed. Extracting productivity from labor, channeling it to capital, concentrating ownership, consolidating power, and calling it capitalism. But it's not capitalism. Adam Smith would be horrified. This is something else, something more predatory. A system where those who own the game board change the rules to ensure they keep winning, where democracy is theater and policy is purchased, where opportunity is a memory and mobility is a myth. This is where we are. This is what's happening. And the only question that remains is what you're going to do about it, because the transfer is almost complete. And once stage 5 hits, once the final crisis finalizes the consolidation, there's no going back. The new structure becomes permanent, and the society that emerges on the other side will be one where wealth and poverty are inherited, where your life is determined at birth, where the American dream, already fading, becomes completely extinct. That's the stakes. That's what we're facing. And the clock is ticking. I'll see you on the other side.